Welcome to Shopstead. Today we're building a bed on a budget. These are the parts from an old bunk bed I had from when I was a kid. We're using these frame rails, a cheap sheet of sanded plywood, and some 4x4s. We're going to make a brand new bed. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and measure these 4x4s. Go ahead and get them cut to length at the chop saw. Since this is just 4x4 pine from the box store, the ends almost always have imperfections. So I'm going to cut a little bit off each end to make sure they're nice and square, especially since I'm not using the whole length in the project. For lengths, we're going to go ahead and do 32 and 44. Oh boy, man, I'm glad we have electricity. That would have taken me all day with that stupid hatchet. Anyway, next thing I'm going to do is we're going to run these through the table saw. I want to bring them down to about 3x3. I want to do this for two reasons. One, being as they are construction grade lumber, they got nicks and dings and splinters all over them. Two, I think they just look a little bit chunky sitting on the edge of the bed the way they are, so I want to shrink them down. And I also want to get rid of the rounded off corners, because that's the way 2x4s and 4x4s come. Let's go ahead and get that done. Now comes every woodworker's favorite part. Sanding. Yay! I just went ahead and sanded these down to 80 grit to get rid of any of the saw marks, just so that I can get accurate measurements on them. Next thing we're going to do is cut the grooves so that that frame rail can go ahead and slide in and sit on these pins. If you have an old bed system, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I need to do this first so that I can get these cut in here so I can measure to cut the plywood to the correct width. Measuring this piece of steel, I can tell you that it's about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch thick. The cut on here is about 6.5, and it sits up off the bottom of that post from 5 inches to about 11.5 inches. I need to transfer these measurements onto these posts so we know where the frame rail will sit. That'll be your bed height. I'm going to make that cut, that groove, using what's called a plunge cut with my circular saw. One more thing we need to do before we make this cut is set the blade depth so that I don't go all the way through the board. I want to go about halfway through, so I'm just going to go ahead and raise this up to about halfway, about 1.5 inches. That'll be about deep enough for those hooks to go in. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that in place right there. Now I've got my piece pretty firmly clamped down over here. I'm going to raise the blade guard, lift the saw up, and plunge the saw down, and that's going to be our plunge cut to cut that groove. I'm going to do that a couple different times to make sure I've got the proper width on there. Now that I got these grooves cut, I need to find the exact placement of these pins so that I can drill accurate holes. This is actually where we set the true bed height. The grooves were just a rough measurement. So I'm going to come through here and get the depth and the height off the bottom and transfer those measurements to here. Drill some holes on my drill press to make sure they're nice and straight and set the pins. Alright, now that we got these holes drilled, I'm going to go ahead and make some new pins to fit in there. This is just 1/4 inch steel rod. I'm just going to go ahead and use a cutoff wheel over here in my clamp and get them cut up. Get that done. Finally, after all that, we get the measurements for the plywood. We're going to do that by measuring the grooves on the old table. It's going to be 38 3/4. I also need to measure how far those grooves are from the edge. That's going to be 1 inch on here and 1.5 inches on the new posts. So I need to add those 2 1/2 inches together, which is 1 inch. Then we're going to subtract that from the 38 3/4, leaving us with 37 3/4, and that's the cut for the plywood. what I'm going for with the headboard and footboard is something similar to this right here. Excuse my poor drawing skills. It'll be even when I transfer it to the wood. I'm going to do some measurements, kind of play around with some stuff, and then get that cut out with the jigsaw. Time to attach the head and footboards to the posts themselves. The way that I've decided to do this is what's called a Craig system, or pocket hole screws. They're good for cabinets, they're good for a lot of uses, and I'm pretty sure they'll be fine in this application. You could do a couple different things, such as cutting grooves into the posts themselves and inserting the head and footboards and clamping them under pressure. You could use dowels, you could do a couple different things. But I have this system already, and I'm sure it's going to work just fine. Now, if we look on this kit here, there's numbers for setting the depth of your drill stop and also for the depth of the board, or the width of the board that you're going to be drilling into. At the top of here, there's all these holes set at a specific angle in order to drill into the wood. I'm going to go ahead and set this for 1/2 inch because that's exactly what size board we're using. And then I'm going to do my best to adjust this thing right here in order to clamp the board in place. That way, I can come in here and screw down into the side of the board. Another thing that I should mention is the drill stop, the height of this here, and the clamp itself are all set to the thickness of the board that you're drilling into. The size of the screw is determined by the board that you're screwing this to. With all these holes drilled now, the next step is to go ahead and attach the boards to the posts. I want to measure up from the bottom on the head and footboard to make sure they're sitting at the correct height, basically something that looks visually appealing. I'm going to run some glue along the edges and then get to screwing. You know what I mean. Stop that. Grow up. After eating some well-deserved dinner and giving the glue time to dry, it's time to paint. I went ahead and sanded this up to 120 grit and dusted it off. We don't need to go any further than that because we're just covering it with paint. If we were going to use some stain and some polyurethane, I'd go to 220, but that's about it. For paint today, we're using Sherwin-Williams Emerald Trim Enamel. The color is iron ore, and the sheen is satin, so it won't be too glossy. This trim enamel stuff has a really hard, durable surface. It's easy to wipe off, and it takes a beating, which is good for somebody getting in and out of the bed and everything like that. It's pretty expensive, running about $80 a gallon, with a discount about $65, $70. Let's paint. They missed me. It's the next day now. I've got 2 coats of paint on this bed frame. I sanded in between each coat with 120 grit. I also took a wire wheel to these old frame rails to get all the rust and old paint off of them, then coated them with some protective enamel. This stuff is also really hard and durable, and it should last for a good long while. As you can see from that last shot, I went ahead and put these decorative knobs on top of the post to give it a more finished look. It's really easy to do this. All you have to do is take a ruler and run it from corner to corner, mark your lines, and that's your center. Drill your hole. These come with screws in the bottom of them, you just twist them right in. What you could not see in that last shot was the cool decorative pieces that I went ahead and put on here to really make this project pop. They're just CNC carvings that you can find at any big box store in the trim section. I just bought them home, hit them with some gold spray paint, brushed some glue on the back of them, let them sit with some weight on them for about half an hour, and this is the result. Now for the ratings and cost breakdown. I would rate this a experienced hobbyist to intermediate woodworking due to the use of the table saw and jigsaw and a couple other things like that. You could very easily make this more simple by using straight cuts instead of giving it the arch, by not adding the knobs or the decals. Cost breakdown wise, the sheet of plywood cost me $45 and the 4x4s cost me $20. That gives me a total of, man, I really need to not do math live, 80 and change with tax. These extra accent pieces cost me a total of $30. So all in all, we're at $110 with maybe $20 worth of paint used. This thing will last way longer than any IKEA or big box store bed frame that you can get. And I guarantee if you try it, you'll be happy with the result. And that's how you build a bed on a budget. As I mentioned earlier, I built this bed for my sister. I'm also going to be building a matching side table and bookshelf just using some scraps I have here in my shop. I think I'm going to make it a 3-part series and call it Cheaper but More Gooder. Something like that. Anyways, if you like how this build turned out, you want to see how those builds turn out, some of the cool projects I work on here in my shop and on my homestead, please subscribe and turn on your notifications so you can tell when I upload a new video. Other than that, thanks for watching and have a more gooder day.